Till last week, we learned about software architectures or web development architectures, and then service-oriented architecture, and then the uses of service-oriented architecture and the governance of service-oriented architecture. And afterwards, we learned about what you call WSDL, UDDI, and web services and those things. So basically, now the theoretical part of this module is almost done, right? So I understand there are some couple of things or couple of topics that you don't understand much properly, because something like WSDL and UDDI, those advanced topics, you may not understand. And I have received some emails saying that if I can explain them again, right? So what I'm going to do here is, now basically WSDL, UDDI, those things are basically what you call XML based documents. So all of them are developed with XML. So what I'll do is I'll explain this WSDL and UDDI, those documents again, and the SOAP concepts, everything, right? So everything applicable to these theoretical parts once we complete this XML practicals, right? So once completing this XML for beginners session, so this XML session, we'll do the WSDL part and everything again in a more quick approach, just to make sure that you understand the concepts properly, right? So XML. Now I took this slideshow from a book, actually, Organizing and Searching Information with XML. You can find this book on internet. It's a big one. So that is one of a recommended reading for most of the degree programs when it comes to web services. So I took this slide from that book, and I thought of teaching you XML through this slide set, and also by incorporating some components from W3 schools as well, right? So XML, right? So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, right? Extensible, not it starts with E letter, but still it's pronounced like extensible. It is called XML, right? So throughout this first session, we are going to learn about basic XML concepts, defining XML data formats, and querying XML data, these things. And afterwards, we have some advanced topics to learn too, right? So moving forward, snake oil. What is snake oil? Snake oil කියන්නේ
සර්පතෙල්.
සර්පතෙල්. ඉස්සර ඉඳලා තියෙනවා සර්පතෙල් විලඳු අහලා තියෙනවා. කෝකටත් තෛලය කියලා ගෙවල් ගානි කියලා විකුණන ඕන ලෙඩකට මේක සනීප වෙනවා කියලා, right? Right? So XML is like snake oil of the internet age. Why is that? Right? It is applicable to anything. That means XML is platform independent, right? It doesn't matter what is the device, what is the platform, what is the programming language, what is the development environment, right? Whether it's a internet-based software or whether it's a standalone software, XML is platform independent. You can use it for any kind of software or tool that you like, right? So it's basically like snake oil for the internet age, right? That means it is platform independent, right? So snake oil is the all curing drug these strange guys in Wild West movies sell, traveling from town to town, but visiting each town only once, right? So right. So these are basically uses of XML, right? You can see the screen clearly, right? Screen කවුලක් නෑ නේද?
Yes, sir.
Yes, there's a problem with my internet connection. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. There's a problem with dialogue these days. So XML revolutionizes software development. That obviously you know what is loosely coupling, what is tightly coupling, how software oriented, service oriented architecture works, right? And what is entire architecture. So XML obviously revolutionizes software development, right? XML is the all healing world peace inducing tool for computer processing, right? So basically, if an online tool or online business or online website, online web application, if it wants to interact with some other business tool or some other web application or some other service which another company is offering, right? So if these businesses through internet or websites through internet wants to communicate with each other, now, as we learned in our previous sessions, XML is the platform for them to communicate with each other. And in the same time, XML enables application portability, right? So application portability means here now, when it comes to older days, as we learned earlier, applications were standalone, right? You have to stay at the same application and do everything. But now application uses different services from different service providers, right? So, and forget the web, XML is the new way to do business, right? So as an example, I took that e-commerce example, if you can remember, right? So if you want to process some payments, you don't have to have a credit card processing system from some expensive bank. You just can use some payment processing tool like PayPal, right? And get your work done, right? XML is the key for your data exchange, information integration, data exchange, right? You name it, whatever your problem, XML has a solution, right? So XML is the medium to share data between different web applications, right? Or different services. So it's basically act as what you call a platform, a medium, right? So like if you and me want to speak with each other, we need to have some common medium or common platform. That is the language. The English language is some common platform to speak with each other. So as an example, if assume that there are some students who understand only English and Tamil, and there are another set of students who understand only English and Sinhala, right? So if I want to convey a message that is understandable to each and everyone, so I should use that common language which everyone knows, which is English. So basically XML is like that, right? So to exchange information or exchange data, XML provides support, right?
According to
And apart from
Wikipedia,
that,
Google
XML, the
Translate
mother
is a
of all,
multilingual neural machine
application
translation
languages,
service developed
right?
by
So
Google to
basically the same
translate
thing
text,
I
documents, and
explained so far.
websites from one language into another.
Right. So XML is not a replacement for HTML, right? So you can't get confused. XML is not HTML, right? XML is not an advanced version of HTML, or XML is not the replacement or successor for HTML, right? XML is a different thing and HTML is another thing, right? But you can use XML to generate HTML websites, right? So by using XML, you can generate HTML pages, but XML is not a replacement for HTML, right? And XML is not a what you call presentation format, right? So what it says is XML is not a presentation format, right? So basically what you can do is, now let's say, now you can see these kiosk machines, right? Kiosk machines then no. What are kiosk machines then? Or then the kiosk machines.
Sorry sir, मैं පැහැදිලි නෑ මේ කියපු එක. Hello.
පැහැදිලි නැකින් මාව ඇහෙන්නේ නැද්ද ඔයගොල්ලන්ට හරියට?
මේ කැඩි කැඩි වගේ ඇහුනේ මොකද ආපහු අහන්නකො සර් මොකද්ද ඇහුවේ?
Kiosk machines. Kiosk.
Kiosk. I'm all an answer.
මම chat එකට දාන වචනේ kiosk. අහලා නැද්ද? presentation කිව්වම මට මතක් වුණේ මේක එකයි මම. දැන් මේක. Right. Kiosk කියන්නේ kiosk means now have you seen that machines where you can put reloads, pay bills and whatever you can do with one machine? touch screen machine එකක් තියෙනවා. ඔයගොල්ලන්ට සල්ලි දාලා පුළුවන් ඕන දෙයක් කරගන්න. දැකලා තියෙනවද?
ඔව් සර්.
That is kiosk. Right? So do you know what is the operating system that is running on kiosk machines?
Embedded operating system.
Android. Right? So
In our university there is one, but I think it has Windows XP or something.
අයනම් පරණ machine එක. කල්යුගේ machine එක.
ලංකාවේ
Right, so I was working with some suppliers. They were using Android now, right? So these kiosk machines were one of the best innovations that is emerged because of these web services and XML, right? Why is that? Again, can anyone explain from things that you have learned so far? Why we can say kiosk machines is one of the best inventions because of this XML and service-oriented architecture. Why is that?
Because it's fast for data retrieve and insert.
Yes. So basically, kiosk machine, what it does is now, let's say you want to put some reload to your phone, right? So basically, you are doing the payment through the kiosk machine, right? So once you do the payment, now the kiosk machine should have an interface to communicate with dialogue, right? Or Mobitel, or Hutch, or whatever, right? And they have to communicate with that, and they have to say that, right, I took a payment for this amount, and please top up this user with this amount, right? මම රුපියල් 100ක් ගත්ත මෙයාගේ මෙයාට මේ රුපියල් 100ක රීලෝඩ් එක ගන්න මේ නම්බර් එකට. Right? So kiosk machine should send a request to the web service of Dialog or Hutch, right? And then Dialog or Hutch or Mobitel or whatever the platform, they will send a response to the kiosk machine. Okay, I have reloaded, right? Or else it will send a message saying that, sorry, the number is incorrect, so I can't reload, right? So in the similar way, you can pay your bills and everything. So that is all this possible because this service-oriented architecture, web services, and XML, right? So they are communicating with each other and getting things done. So I told you last week also, this web services means communication platform in between businesses, right? So we are communicating, right? So we are communicating with business to customer, right? So business to business can communicate with this service-oriented architecture and web services, right? So kiosk machine is one of the best inventions that has been emerged because of this service-oriented architecture. Not only that, there are huge number of
So Emma, thank you so much for taking the time
inventions
to
in the
talk to
moment
me. So
in the world
Oslo.
which are happening because of this.
Oslo is
what you
kind of
call
rainy.
Yeah.
Kind of rainy, but
service-oriented
I
architecture,
really struck by
XML,
those
SOAP,
row
and
of
those
buildings
these
right
technologies
across
we
from
have
the
been
train
discussing
station.
so far, right? So XML is not a presentation format, right? So XML is not a replacement for HTML, and XML is not a presentation format as well, right? So you can't use XML to present something to a customer, right? Let's say you go based on some reports that
creates
you
a
are
good
getting
story?
through XML, right?
Well,
You're
yeah,
generating
so
some
what
reports
creates a
from
good
database, and that database data is passed to the client as an XML file, right? As an example, let's say like this. So here you are generating some data from the database, right? And you are sending this to customer via XML file, right? So customer can't read this XML file. Customer is here. This customer can't read this XML file, right? He can't see what is there in this XML, right? මේ XML කියන්නේ මොකක්ද මේ මොකක්ද මේවල තියෙන පණිවිඩය කියලා කස්ටමර්ට තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. So XML is not a presentation format. Okay. So by using XML, you can't present anything to anyone. XML is not a presentation format, right? But XML can be converted into one, right? By incorporating HTML or maybe some other presentation tools or maybe various things, right? By using some tools like HTML and things, you can simply convert this XML data to a presentation format. But XML alone is not a presentation format, right? So XML is not a programming language, right? XML can be programming language. You can't write programs with XML, but it can be used with almost any language, right? So XML can be used as a tool for communication and data representation, and for those things, XML can be used with almost any programming language, but XML is not a programming language, right? And XML is not a network transfer protocol, right? Right. So network transfer protocols are HTTP, FTP, and then SMTP, IMAP, right? Those are Telnet, SSH. Those are network transfer protocols, right? But XML is not a network transfer protocol, but XML can be used to transfer data over network, right? Network through data transfer current XML can be used, but XML alone is not a network transfer protocol, right? So you can't be confused with these things. So XML is not a database, right? So XML is not a database. You can't store data in XML, but you can use XML to retrieve data, and you can keep XML files saved in a database. But XML is not a database, right? But then what it is, XML is a meta markup language for text documents, textual data, right? So XML is a meta markup language for text documents, right? XML allows to define languages to represent text documents or textual data. Right. So what it says, XML is a meta markup language. It is not a programming language. It is a meta markup language, and this XML can be used to represent data. Right. Represent data now. XML data is retrieved. Maybe data is retrieved to a website as XML files, and these XML files can be used to represent those data with some other programming language. So as an example, let's say you are retrieving some data from a web server through XML, and you can use JavaScript to represent those data, right? So this is a simple XML file, right? So here you can see article, and then author, title, and the article, right? So as an example, this is an article, right? And this article is written by this author, right? So Jihad Vico, right? And the title, the web in 10 years, right? So basically this XML document represent an article. XML document represent an article, right? And this article is written by this person, this author, right? And the author of this article is this person. And the title of this article is web in 10 years, right? So as an example, let's say you want to retrieve some data from a database, the name of the article and the person who wrote that one, right? So article is written by this person, title of the article is this one, and that is the end of this article, right? So this is easy to understand for human users. So by seeing this, you can say what it is. Very expressive, right? So this is very expressive, right? So it explicitly say that this is author, this is title. So this is very expressive, well structured, easy to read and write from programs, right? So as an example, let's say you are developing a web service, right? So what your web service does is when someone requests article information, so take this example, right? So you are writing a web service, which when someone requests data from your web service, what you do is you retrieve the data from the web service and send those data to the client through what you call XML file, right? So basically what it does is when someone requests for article data, it generates an XML file and then it sends those data as an XML file to the client, right? So this is very simple. As an example, if you want to write those data, first thing from the web service site you have to do is you retrieve the data from the database, right? And you write these two articles, right? Article text, right? And then you get the author and you enter the author text inside this article, and then you get the title from the database, right? And then you define the title as well, right? And then you send this to the person who is requesting this data, right? So once the person receives this data, he can see now, okay, article is here, right? So inside the article, he can see author, and inside the article again, he can see the title, right? So he can simply print those data in his website, right? So what we do is from the server side, we write the web service and we generate this XML file into this particular standard author and title and send it to the client. So client get the file from us. He simply see, this is the article, this is the author, this is the title. So he print this data in his user interface, right? So this is well structured, easy to read and write from programs, right? This looks nice, but this is XML2, right? So this is XML. This looks nice. This is easy to understand. This is very expressive. This is well structured, easy to read and write programs. Yes, this looks nice, but this is XML2, right? Then make a theorem. You can understand this, right? Make a balapugan theorem. But can you understand this? No, right? T108 can, what is this? We don't know. What is X87? We don't know, right? Hard to understand for human users, not expressive, right? Well structured, easy to read and write from programs, right? So this is easy to understand and very expressive. This is hard to understand and not expressive, but still both this and previous one, both of them are well structured, easy to read and write from programs, right? What is this one? Impossible to understand for human users, not expressive. Unstructured, read and write only with special programs, right? So what is the outcome that we can get from these examples, right? So we went through 3 examples. First one is easy to understandable for both humans and computers, well structured, and it is, first one is very expressive, second one is not expressive, right? And here we have third one, that is impossible to understand for humans. We can't understand anything, right? And this is not expressive at all, right? Unstructured, read and write only with special programs, right? This is not structured, right? So this one is properly structured. There's by seeing this, you can see there's a proper structure. This is the start, this is then, this is the start, this is then. So there's a proper structure. But by seeing this, you can see there's no proper structure. Read and write only with special programs, right? See, now this can be read and written only with special programs. Not everyone can do that, right? So actual benefit of using example highly depends on the design of the application, right? So you have to keep this in mind. The actual benefit of using XML highly depends on the design of the application, right? Maybe you can design the application to be very precise and very understandable and structured for users, right? So if we take the first one as an example, if we take this one as an example, so this is very expressive, well structured, easy to understand for everyone, right? So actual benefit of using XML highly depends on the design of the application, right? The first one is better. First one is better. It is easy to understand, easy to program, easy to write, well structured, right? But when it comes to security aspects, let's say you are transferring some sensitive information like credit card details, or maybe you have some medical things, or your health information, maybe something very sensitive information through XML files like this. So it's just a matter of someone to eavesdrop and get the XML file. XML file, right? So if it is highly structured and easy to read, what happens? There's no data security at all, right? But when it comes to something like this, if you want to share some sensitive information, if you use something like this, what happens? This is unstructured, and humans can never understand what is defined in this random, right? So actual benefit of using XML highly depends on the design of the application, right? So when it comes to banks and in banks, when it comes to places where they process payments, this can be very useful, right? But when it comes to some simple systems that you're used to using day-to-day use, when it comes to those things, this is not much of an advantage, right? So the actual benefit of using XML highly depends on the design of the application, right? So you have to choose what is the best approach for my application. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Possible advantages of using XML. Truly portable data. So data is portable, right? You can read and write data from different places, not the computer where the database exists. Database, you can get the data from anywhere if you have the proper connectivity, right? Easily readable by human users, right? This is dependable on the design of the application, right? Very expressive in certain cases. There can be cases where this data is not very expressive, and very flexible and customizable. So unlike HTML, XML doesn't have a set amount of tags, right? XML like tags use set right? If you don't use these tags, the program will not work. You definitely have to use these tags. There's nothing in XML like that, right? You can use whatever the flexible tags that you can use, right? But of course, there are some restrictions and conditions that you have to meet. We'll discuss them in the coming future, but XML is very flexible when you compare it with right, okay, I'll give 10 minutes break for this. Advantages of XML. So easily readable by human users. This is, I told you, this is dependable on the design, based on the design of the website or web application or whatever the application that you're using. And XML is very expressive. Then this again depends on what you call the design of the application, and then very flexible and customizable, right? So you don't have a finite set of tags. You can use whatever the tags you like, right? But there are some conditions which we will be learning in the coming slides. Right? Easy to use from programs, right? Let's say you are developing XML font from what you call Android Studio as an example. So in Android Studio, there's a separate tools for generate XML files, right? XML files, manually code we can generate it from Android Studio itself, right? But and when it comes to C#.NET, ASP.NET also, we can generate XML files using libraries available, right? Because it's a standard. It's standard එකක් නිසා. Easy to convert into other representations, right? As an example, now you have your data in one format in your applications, and in another application you have to show it. You want to show it in a different representation. Let's say you have in a table representation and you want to represent it as a graph. So simply you can take the XML file and represent it as a graph, right? And maybe in another one you can represent it as a table. Maybe in another one you can represent it as a report, right? Maybe what you call a chart, right? Likewise, easy to convert into other representations. Many additional standards and tools. There are many additional standards like WSDL, SOAP, UDDI. There are many additional standards and tools available. And this is widely used and supported. XML is widely used and supported. Okay. And then app scenario, right? So please see if you can understand this one, right? So what it says is, now here we have database with XML document, right? And here we are using converters, XML to HTML, XML to WML, XML to PDF, right? So you can represent this in many ways, right? So XML to HTML, you can see it like this, and XML to WML, you are representing on mobile devices, and XML to PDF, we are representing this as PDFs, right? So, okay, right. And here, data exchange, right? I think we have discussed these things many times, right? So here's the database, and these are legacy systems. Legacy systems means these are very old systems where you don't have communication abilities, right? You can't communicate with each other. There are no web services available on these legacy systems. So what you can do is you can simply write XML adapter and get the data to XML adapter. And then you can communicate this XML data to the XML adapter of another application and to that application, right? So this is a bit old book, so that's why you're seeing things like this. So basically, it's more like this. The approach is more like this, right? And XML for metadata, right? So what are these metadata means?
HTML file එක ගත්තොත් ඒකේ metadata කියන්නේ අර මේ චර මොනවාද language එක පිළිබඳව ඒකේ language එක Unicode ද ASCII ද ඊට පස්සේ තව metadata use කරනවා අර මොකද්ද HTML page එකේ තියෙන්නේ මොනවද කියලා බලා ගන්න අර මේ search engine එකෙන් search කරනකොට අල්ල ගන්න මෙතන XML වලත් ඒ විදිහම හිතන්නේ සර්.
Right. So metadata means, let's say, right? So some data about what is being represented in a particular document, right? මොකක් හරි document එක represent කරන data මොනවද? What are the items? Basically, it's more like the things. As an example, let's say a web article, right? When it comes to a web article, it has some metadata like authors, published date, co-authors, publisher's name, right? Likewise, there are many things, right? So as an example, for this article that you're seeing, this is the metadata, right? So title is a framework for, and this creator, description, publisher, those things are the metadata for this article, right? And similarly for mobile applications, there are another set of metadata, right? And likewise, there are many things, many aspects when it comes to metadata, right? And that is depends on the platform. Maybe for a blog, there are some set of metadata. As an example, when it comes to a website, there are meta tags for a website, right? In this meta tag, we have mainly meta title, and then we have meta keywords, right? And meta images. Likewise, we have different things. So what are these metadata. So sometimes this metadata is used for search engine optimization. As an example, meta title, meta keywords, meta description. Those things are used in a website for search engine optimization, right? Likewise, XML can be used to define this metadata as well, right? So when it comes to this article, we are defining its metadata like this, right? And for document markup as well, right? So as an example, for when it comes to certain HTML files, right? So as an example, let's say you are developing a blog, or you are writing a blog. In the blog, you can use this article and literature section, these tags within the website, right? Many article tags use karan. Those are derived from XML, right? As an example, if you are writing an article, if you use this article tag, now search engines will find your blog post as an article, right? So there are some advantages like that using XML for document markup. Right? Document markup adds structural and semantic information to documents, sections, subsections, theorems, cross-references, indexes, articles, many things, right? Basic XML concepts, right? So these are the XML standards. XML standards are XML documents. What is an XML document? So XML documents has these components, elements, attributes, plus some other details, right? So basically, ignore this plus some other details for now. Plus some other details for then ignore karla. So basically, XML documents have elements and attributes. So we are dealing with these elements and attributes, right? So in this XML document, can you tell me what are the elements, what are the attributes?
Element is article element and author element, title element, text element, and attribute is I think number equal to 1 and title.
Sorry?
Element is like that tags, articles, author tag, and title tag. So attribute is we can see section tag, include then number and title. Those are I think
Yes,
attributes.
correct. Right. So this article, author, title, text, abstract, section, text, those things. What you call this? These are elements, right? In the Meva. Author, article, text, abstract. These are elements, and these elements have closing tags as well, right? Title, author has author closing tag. Title has title closing tag. Article has article closing tag, right? And then here we have these are attributes, right? And there are some conditions when it comes to elements and attributes, right? So elements should definitely have a closing tag. Opening tag gets an element tag, anivariyama closing tag, right? And attributes, when it comes to attributes, single element cannot have more than one type of attribute. One attribute can't be duplicated in the same element. You can element attribute duplicate right? So as an example, this section can have only one number attribute and one title attribute. So if it has another number attribute, that is wrong. It can have only one number attribute, one title attribute, and many like attributes on but only one from one type. That is the condition, right? So you can see freely definable tags, article tags, right? So these tags are freely definable, and then you can see start tag, end tag, content of the element, and attributes. So attributes have the attribute name and the value of the attribute. So this is the attribute name. This is the attribute value, right? Freely definable tags, article, title, author. Start with opening tag, closing with closing tag, right? අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම XML එකක් මෙහෙම පටන් අරන් මෙහෙම ඉවර වෙන්නම ඕනේ. Right? So this is a complete element. Right? So this මෙතෙන්ද මෙතෙන්ට තියෙන්නේ මේක එක element එකක්. මේක එක element එකක්. This title is another one element, right? So that means from start to end of a particular tag, right? From start to end of a particular tag, we call it an article, right? So articles are defined using start tag and end tag, right? Elements have a name and content, right? So basically, this is the name of the element. This is the name of the element. This is the name of the element. This is the name of the element, right? So what are the contents of these elements, right? Items in between these tags, right? As an example, title කියන element එකේ in the title element, the content of the element is the web in 10 years, right? So this is the content of the element and this is the name of the element, right? Elements have name and content. Elements may be nested. So what is nested means? You can define one element inside another element. Right? Nested means, what is nested? Nested means you can define one element inside another element, right? So as an example, you can see here. Here we have defined index inside section, right? Author inside article, title inside article, right? Abstract inside text. So that is mean nesting elements, right? Or nesting tags. Elements may be nested. Elements may be empty, right? Elements can be empty. Element එකක් empty නම් you can define it like this. Element content is typically passed character data, right? Right. This thing. If you're using special characters, we have to pass it in a particular way, right? What are special characters? If you're using something like slash mark or this HTML tag marks, dots, percentage marks, those things, we have to pass these properly. Otherwise, it will affect the XML file. Entire XML file will show as an error, right? Each XML document has exactly one root element and forms a tree, right? So what it says is each XML document has exactly one root element. So what is the root element of this? This XML document, right? Each XML element has exactly one root element. මොකක්ද මේකේ root එක? Article, correct. And it forms a tree, right? This root element forms a tree. Make a tree එකක් හදනවා. Elements with common parents are ordered, right? So make me tree එකක් කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? Can anyone explain what is a tree? Right? As an example, let's say this is article, right? එතකොට article එක ඇතුළේ ඉන්නවා author, title, text, right? Text එක ඇතුළේ ඉන්නවා abstract text එක ඇතුළේ ඉන්නවා abstract and then section, right? So can you see now? Now this is a tree, right? So this is the root element, right? Again, this is the root element, which is article, and article has 3 other elements, child elements, right? So article has 3 other child elements: author, title, and text, right? So these now this author, title, and text elements are child elements of this root element, right? And this article is the parent element of author, title, and text, right? And then this again, this text has 2 other branches or 2 other childs: abstract and section, right? And section has another element called, another child called, here you can see, index, right? So this is the tree. This is the tree view. Clear? So it says each XML document has exactly 1 root element and forms a tree. Elements with common parents are ordered, right? So common parent is the elements of common ekata dala idita order vela තියෙනවා, right? Elements may have attributes in the start tag that have name and a value, right? So you have done HTML already, so you know what are these attributes and what are the values, right? So when it comes to, if you, in case if you don't remember, elements can have its attributes in the start tag, right? End tag ekedi attributes them matter, it is not going to work. So what you call start tag, when you are defining attributes, you have to define it within the start tag, right? Attributes have a name and a value. As an example, section number is 1, right? What is the difference between elements and attributes, right? Only one attribute with a given name per element, right? So only one attribute with a given name per element. This is what I explained earlier. You can have only one element with a given name, right? You can't duplicate an attribute. You can ekam attribute එකෙන් attributes දෙකක් තියෙන්න බෑ එක tag එකක් ඇතුලේ. එක tag එකකට තියෙන්න බෑ එක නමින් එක attribute එකක් විතරයි. Only one attribute with a given name per element, right? But an arbitrary number of sub elements, right? So as an example, you can have many sub elements with the same name, but you can have only one attribute with a given name. Attributes have no structures, simply strings, right? So attributes doesn't have any structure. It doesn't have any childs, any parents, or anything like that. It is a simply string. Or text value එකක් විතරයි, එක value එකක් විතරයි එතන තියෙන්නේ, right? While elements can be trees of elements when it has many sub elements, right? So as a rule of thumb, for easier reference, ලේසියෙන් මතක තියාගන්න, content into elements, metadata into attributes, right? So contents යන්නේ elements වලට, metadata යන්නේ attributes වලට, right? ඒ කියන්නේ let's say as an example, now Alan Turing is a person, right? So person කියන person කවුද? The content of the person tag is Alan Turing, right? And the metadata of this person, born and died, these things are there as attributes, right? So metadata is there as attributes, content is there as what you call content inside the element, right? Okay. තේරුණාද කට්ටියට? Understood everyone?
Yes, sir. No problem.
So do you know who is Alan Turing is? Alan Turing කියන කවුද කියලා දන්නවද? කවුද?
ENIAC computer එක හදපු එකනේ ජර්මන්.
Alan Turing කියන්නේ ජර්මන් නෙමෙයි.
නෑ අර ජර්මන් මොකක් හරි අර එන්ක්‍රිප්ෂන් එක ඩික්‍රිප්ට් කරන්න හදන්නේ මැෂින් එක.
ඒ ෆිල්ම් එක බලලා තියෙන කවුරු ඉන්නවද?
ඔව් ඒක මතක.
The Imitation Game. Has anyone watched?
Yes sir.
Right. ඒ කියන්නේ Alan Turing කියන කවුද කියලා දන්නවනේ. Right. So Alan Turing is considered as the what you call the first person who invented the computer, right? That is invented to solve that German encryption code called, what is it? What is the German encryption? Enigma. Right? Enigma කියන එක decipher කරන්න එහෙම නැත්නම් decrypt කරන්න solution එක හදපු එක තමයි Alan Turing කියන්නේ. Right? And he is considered as the father of, not the father, but he is the first person, I don't exactly remember, he is the first person who developed something like a computer. Right? So XML documents as ordered trees. Right? So I defined this earlier. So article has author and title, right? And text. Now text has another two, abstract and section, right? And this section has index, while this section has two attributes called number and title, right? So these are the elements. Elements have their parents and their children, and then attributes as well. So this is the, what is this called? මේකට කියන වචනයක් තියෙනවා. මේ tree එකට කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? JavaScript එක ඉගෙන ගත්තා නම් දාන්න.
hierarchy.
Sorry?
hierarchy එකක්ද නෑ.
Document Object Model. DOM.
sorry.
අහලා තියෙනවනේ?
අහලා තියෙනවා. Document object model.
Right. So I told you earlier that if you are passing some special characters, those should be escaped using entities, right? So as an example, if you want to pass this, make a pass karanna, you have to use this character set. If you are using this, you have to use this one, right? Likewise, if you are using some special characters, then you obviously you have to escape those items using entities, right? Right. Well-formed XML documents. A well-formed document must adhere to, among others, the following rules, right? Every start tag has a now. If it is the XML document is now, right? If you want to use some kind of XML document with your program or with your application, right? If you want to use some kind of XML program with your application, that XML document should be well formed, right? Otherwise, it will throw an error. It is not going to work, right? So you should have a well formed document, right? And that well formed document must adhere to following rules, right? Every start tag has a matching end tag, right? So obviously every start tag should have a matching end tag. Elements may nest, but must not overlap, right? Elements nest karanna puluwan, but you can't overlap, right? As an example, you are defining a book, and inside the book you are defining the author. Inside the author, you are defining a book again, right? So that is overlapping. You can't do that, right? So as an example, here you are having the book, right? Here you are having the book. Inside the book you are having author, and inside this author again you are having the book. That means it goes here again, right? So this overlapping should not be done, right? There must be exactly one root element. We discussed this earlier. Attribute values must be coded, right? Attribute attributes has two conventions. One is name and the other one is value. When you're defining the value of the attribute, that should definitely be quoted, either double quoted or single quoted. That should definitely be quoted. An element may not have two attributes with the same name. That also I discussed earlier. Elements can have only one element with the same name. You can't duplicate the same element again and again inside the same attribute inside the same element again and again. Comments and processing instructions may not appear inside tags, right? So how to process and comments, right? So api program element comments done. So in XML you can't have those comments. You can have but may not. May not means you may have but that is not recommended, right? Not unscaped. This less than and greater than and these special characters may occur inside character data. ඒ කියන්නේ මේවා අර මම කලින් කිව්ව විදිහට පාස් කරලා තියෙනවා. Right? Only well-formed documents can be processed by XML parsers, right? So this is the thing. Only well-formed documents can be processed by XML parsers, right? If it is not well-formed, that means it is definitely not going to work in the way that you are intended, right? Right. Another thing, namespaces. So what are these namespaces? Why do we have to use these namespaces? Right. I'll do a quick example. Can you see the screen? This coding window? So as an example, let's say I'm writing an XML file for table. Right, so table has values. Table data. Like this. Table row as well. So this is an XML file. So there's nothing that restricts you from using HTML text inside XML since it is flexible, right? So name, address, telephone. Likewise, let's imagine that you have multiple number of elements like this throughout your XML document. You know, XML document data database retrieve right, database got the data, right? Let's imagine there are data retrieved from a database, right? And then here again we can have another one, and this table consists of instructions on how to. So first table consists of data on what are the data that is going to be inside the table, right? Table like dependent on data monada kiyala first table, and the second table here we display the specifications for the table, right? Some instructions. There should be 3 columns in the table, and the width of the table should be 300 pixels, right? So in here, this table elements and this table element. These two elements serve two different purposes. First one contains data, second one contains some sort of instructions, right? Even though the same tag, it uses what you call, it used for two purposes. So in that case, we can use a namespace, right? So first one is data. And the second one is structure, right? So to prevent the confusion and to prevent errors, I have added a namespace to the XML text, right? So as an example, let's say you are having multiple number of elements. Right? But each time that element is used for different purposes. So as an example in here, first time for store data and the second time for store the specifications. So in that case, to prevent confusion, I have used a data namespace D called D for this one and S for this one, right? So moving back to the presentation, here you can see, right? The first namespace is used to define the description of the library. මේ library එකේ here. මෙන්න මේ library එකේ description එකට තමයි මේ library එකේ description එකට තමයි first description එක use කරලා තියෙන්නේ, right? First description is used to the description to describe the library, and the second description is used to describe the book, right? Entirely two different purposes. Understood? First one is for description of the library, second one is for description of the book. Entirely two different purposes, right? So semantics of the description element is ambiguous. That means content may be defined differently. Renaming may be impossible, right? So contents varga deka. So anyone know the computers or anyone can't understand what is the purpose of using this same name, right? So first one is the description of the library, second one is for the description of the book. First one is for the description of the library, second one is for the description of the book. So in this case, you imagine now you can't rename this as well. You can't rename because that may be because of some standards. Make a standard date. You can't rename this also. Renaming is not also is also impossible, right? Renaming is also impossible. So in this case, we are using XML namespace, right? So signal that namespace definition happens, right? So here we are signaling the XML file that we are using XML namespace, XML NS. That means we are using XML namespace, right? And the standard for that XML namespace is defined through this URL, right? XML namespace එක මේක එක define කරනවා, and the standard for that namespace is also used here, right? So we are saying that we are using XML namespaces and then unique URI to identify the namespace, right? So this in this URL there will be a definition to understand the or identify the namespace, right? And prefix as abbreviation of URI. DBS කියන එකේ standard එක එහෙම නැත්නම් DBS කියන එක identify කරන්න කොහොමද? Now what is the abbreviation of DBS, or how to identify this DBS? That is being defined as DBS as the prefix here and for the standard as well, right? So here you can see another standard, another namespace, right? Here you are using DBS namespace and here you are using MathML namespace. So if we go to our previous example, if we go here, so here I'm using this namespace called D, right? So here I have to give the instructions to the XML document that I am using XML namespace called DBS, and you can see the standard for this DBS in www.mysite.com D, right? So here you can see the definition for this, and if you want to see the definition for S namespace, Here I'm again defining XML. This is not DBS, this should be D. So XML namespace S standard is inside, or the instructions to identify this namespace is inside. Right? So that is how we use namespace to differentiate different if you're using the same name for the element, right? So what you have to keep in mind is you have to define the prefix. Prefix means this part. This is the prefix, and you have to define the same prefix here also, and you have to use this XML namespace attribute, and then the value of this namespace attribute should be the standard where your XML file exists, right? Or the instructions to identify this XML exists, right? Default namespaces may be set for an element and its content, but not its attributes, right? Default namespace, right, may be set for an element and its content, right? So you can set a default namespace for elements and its contents, right? So as an example, you can use this DBS namespace for its content. When we contents of column use current pull. There's no problem with in using DBS namespace for its all children, right? Right? So you can use it without any restriction, but not its attributes, right? XML namespace can be used to its elements, but not its attribute. Can be overwritten in the elements by specifying the namespace there, right? So you can override, as an example here, namespace for each and every element is DBS except for this MathML, right? So when it comes to MathML, XML namespace is MathML. That means this namespace is overridden in MathML. Otherwise, for everything else, the namespace is DBS. Right? As an example, if you define a namespace here, it is not essential to have the namespace under each and every element. Right? And can be overridden in the element by specifying the namespace there. So if you want to use another namespace for a particular element within another set of elements, you have to override it by simply defining the another namespace. Right. Any examples? Sorry, any questions? Questions? Default namespace for all child elements. Right. Yes. If you define a default namespace, it is for all, it's all child elements. Then why do we define? Why do we put all child elements? Right. As an example, this is being done for different reasons. So one thing is, in this case, when you're seeing this, it is much easier for you to understand what is the namespace, right? So if I define the namespace only in here, when you're editing this again, you will have to go through a lot to edit this, right? And when you have multiple namespaces and when you are overriding namespaces again and again, when it comes to enable maintainability of a software, we can use what you call the namespace under each element like this, or else even though if you don't use it, default namespace will automatically be applied. Right, before moving into the next part, do you want to take a break? Can we start from here? Right, I hope you can see this screen. This
Yes,
XML HTTP request. You can see, right? Right. Okay. So I have a separate XML file also, right? So I have this XML file which I took from internet, right? So it basically a CD catalog, right? So the catalog is the root element. Inside the catalog, you can see this also, right? So inside the catalog, you have CD, title, artist, country, and then company, price, and those things, right? So let's consider this as a web service, right? This XML file is generated from a web service. So we send the request to get all CD data, and this XML file is sent from the server with all data generated from the server. And here I have the code for, I'll explain this again in after showing this what happens here. So here I have written this code to retrieve this data. So once I click on get my CD collection, it will display all the elements from the what you call XML file, right? So here you're using the technology called ajax. What is ajax? Ajax means asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Okay. So here you can see when I click on get my CD collection, it immediately loads, right? There is no page reload or anything, right? Once I click on this button, it immediately loads, right? There's no page reload or anything. So that means this is asynchronous. That means this happens in the background, not the real-time process. So this can be used to retrieve data from the server side without affecting the behavior of the browser, right? Browser behavior to server side data. You can use this what we call the ajax or asynchronous JavaScript and ajax. So once you click on this get my CD collection, it will show all details from this XML file, right? As an example, you can see this is my XML file. Here you have title, artist, country, right? And here you can see artist and the title, which is the first two columns, right? Title and the artist. So let's go to the code, right? So once you go to the code, here you can see the code, right? Now I'll explain what happens from this code, right? So here you can see we have this button, right? I'm not going to teach you HTML. So I'll increase the font size. Can you see now?
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. So here you can see the button, right? HTML button, get my CD collection, right? And when you click the button, this load doc, I think you have learned JavaScript and HTML in previous semesters, right? I'm assuming that you know JavaScript and HTML.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So here you can see the button, and when you click on the button, you can see I have called load doc function, right? So this is the function load doc, right? This is the load document function. Begins from here, right? So once you click on this, once you call this load doc function, it will start new XML HTTP request, which is simply an ajax request, right? So XHTTP is equal to new XML HTTP request, right? XHTTP on ready stage change, right? XHTTP ki state take a change when we are calling a function, right? So if the ready state is 4 and status is 200, right? So when it comes to ajax, we have several number of what you call response calls, right? Maybe 200 can response code status. So can anyone tell me others other codes available? Okay, response codes available. Standard equity use करने 200 can success. 301 can. Redirection. Right. So I'll show you now. This 200 means success. Again, very good. Right. Then we have 301. This is a redirect. Then we have 403. 4 bit. That means unauthorized. Take on the 404. What is 404?
Error.
Page. And we have 500, 503, and those things. 500 again, PHP करना है सहना देखा दे. Internal server error. देखा थी ना?
ඒක නම් දැකලා නැහැ.
එහෙනම් PHP හරියට කරලා නැහැ. Right? So yes. So in here what we check is status is 200. That means if this is success, may ready state change in a success the killer. It's about a success in a method get, and the URL is cd catalog.xml, which is this file. cd catalog.xml. You can make a file call right? Using the get method, right? And if this is success, make a success now, we are calling my function, right? So my function is this, right? So XML, my function eකට pass කරනවා this කියන එක. This කියන්නේ makes XHTTP එකට එන response, right? ඒ කියන්නේ මේක success වුණාට පස්සේ මෙයාට response එකක් එනවා. මේක success මෙන්න මේ get method එකෙන් අපිට එවන response එක, right? එතකොට අපි මේ my function කියන එකට pass කරන්නේ my function කියන මම ඔයගොල්ලෝ ලේසි වෙන්න show table කියලා දෙන්නම්. show table කියන එකට pass කරන්නේ this කියන. this කියන්නේ මෙන්න මේකේ response, right? එතකොට pass වෙන්නේ අර XML file. මෙයාගෙන් ගන්න XML file එක තමයි pass වෙන්නේ, right? So variable I define a variable called variable I, and XML document is equals to XML dot response XML. කියන්නේ මේ XML file එකකින් එන response XML. කියන්නේ XML file එකේ තියෙන මේවට, right? And the table is table එකේ text එක මෙන්න මේවා. Table artist and title, right? Table heading scene heading artist and the title. And then we are running a loop, for loop. For I equals 0, I is less than x dot length. X කියන්නේ XML dot get element by tag name. මේ කියන්නේ XML එකේ get element by tag name, and tag name is cd. That means cd කියන tag element එක ගන්න කියලා කියන්නේ. So here is the cd tag element, right? So x is equal to this cd tag elements, right? So complete thing is stored as an array. Array එකක් විදියට ගන්න. ඊට පස්සේ what we are doing is we are looping through this array while for I is less than x dot length. X එකේ length එකට වඩා I එකේ value එක අඩු වෙනවා. I is less than x dot length. Again, I should be less than the length of array x. That means I should be less than the number of cd tags in this array, right? So that means number of elements, less than number of elements, right? So xi, that means x again, first element again, get elements by tag name artist, right? So that is being stored here, right? So you have to do this practically. So as an example, if I want to add another column, what I can do is I can add a column here also. Let's say country. Get elements by tag name. Tag name is country, right? Like this. So
heading එකක් දාන්න ඕනේ ඒකට.
heading එකක් දාන්න ඕනේ. It's not taking the country. Why it is not taking the country? It is not taking the country. Can anyone spot where the mistake is? Country spellings, country.
Semicolon.
Semicolon is here. This is the end of the line.
උඩ එක.
Here?
Oh.
This is all now. This is a
plus.
No. Line here. This is the complete line here. Up to this place.
line එකේ ඉස්සදී
plus x එන්න ඕනේ.
අත
Here the plus. Yes. Right. Country is also here. Right. So what happens here is, if I'm explaining again, you can see this screen, right? Codings. So first thing is we are calling load doc function from here. Once you click this get my CD correction, you are calling load doc function, right? And on here you're opening the connection, which is get, and which is the method is get, and the file is cdcatalog.xml, right? As an example, if you want to access a web service instead of this one, right? In here now you are accessing a local file that we are storing in our web server, right? Instead of that, if you want to access some web service like this, you can define the URL here, right? So since we don't have any web services ready here, I have defined cdcatalog.xml, right? And yes, and then I send this command. So once this is sent, the state of this XHTTP object is changing, right? So I'm listening to the state change of this XHTTP object, right? So once this state is changed, I'm seeing whether the ready state is 4. That means this is stable, and then the success status, right? So if it is 200, that means right, we are good to go, right? And then I'm calling the function showTable with the response received to this request, which is this, right? And then I'm going to the showTable, right? So in this showTable function, we are forwarding this value or passing this value to showTable, which is this value, which is the XML file, right? So I get the XML file here, and then I use this variable called I as an iterator, and then XML documents is equal to XML.response XML. That means my response again XML file, and I define the table and then variable x is equal to XML document dot get element by tag name, right? So you have to get the element by tag name, which is CD. So CD is the element, right? So we are taking CD elements, right? So X is equals to all the CD elements in this XML document, right? X is equal to CD elements. So to be more clear, we'll rename it as CD elements, right? And here we are taking the length of CD elements into type, right? And CD elements dot I value. I value means first time the value is 0. Second time the value is 1. Right? Third time the value is 2. Fourth time the value is 4. So each time this is going through the first value, second CD element, third CD element, fourth, likewise. So while iterating, we are getting the element by tag name, which is now. We are going through these CD tags. We are going through this each and every CD elements. So when going through CD elements, we are requesting these tag values: artist, title, and country, right? And we are getting these values, and we are finally printing it to the table, like this. Right? So as an example now, I have told you that this XML ajax requests are asynchronous, or else in other words, it is real time, right? That means you don't have to what you call the reload the page to see changes. So as an example, I changed the country name and artist name to let's say my name, right? So if I go here and click on this get my CD collection, sorry, I'm changing the wrong file. I have hosted it somewhere else, right? So this is the correct file. So I'm changing it here. So as you can see now, I think there is something wrong with my web server today. Yes, I think there is something wrong with my web server. So it's up to you to play with this and see what is the output. I think there is something wrong with my web server. Right. Okay. So right. So are you guys comfortable with the things that we did today? Anything that is unclear to you? I'll upload this file to this thing.
Yeah.
Anything else that you don't understand from what we did till now? No?
I think we can fix those things, and if we have a problem, we can ask.
Sorry?
This practical with also we have a problem.
So, so let's imagine that in our example, we used something from our own our own computer, not from web server. So as an example, when you're using web services or when you're consuming web, there are two things. First thing is developing web services. Second thing is consuming web services. So in this example, in this practical, what we went through is the consumption part of the web services, right? That means we are consuming the web service, right? And the next thing that we have to do is we have to develop a web service, right? So we have to develop a web service from the server side, and we have to develop this XML files as well, and then we have to get it from our end like this, right? So you have to get familiar with both processes, developing and consuming of web services, right? So the next part is defining XML data formats, right? Or in other words, document type definitions, DTD. Right, so can we move forward? Or else, do you have any questions to ask? Can we move forward, or do you have any questions to ask from me? What is the best suitable syntax editor? Sublime Text or Visual Studio Code? Actually, that depends. For me, it's Visual Studio Code because I'm using many technologies like PHP and Python and some mobile frameworks like Flutter. So when it comes to Visual Studio Code, it has the direct support for those things. As an example, you can debug a Flutter application with Visual Studio Code itself. Lazy. Otherwise, if you open up Android Studio, it will be a whole mess. That is eating the RAM and everything. So for me, it's Visual Studio Code, but there might be something better for you guys. So what are your preferred code editors, syntax editors? Kiyana balana kattiya monada kamathi script editors kiyala. What is your preference? Visual Studio Code, PHP Storm, Atom, Sublime. What do you like? Sublime.
It's also good.
Before VS Code, I used Sublime. Before VS Code came this far, I was using Sublime. And no, those days I was using what you call Linux, Ubuntu. If you are doing coding, how many screens do you have? One screen. Ek screen එක දක්වමු කරා.
It's is not yet.
මොකද්ද?
Mothering again.
එන්නේ මට කැඩි. Unfortunately, one screen. Right. So document type definitions or DTD. Right. Sometimes XML is too flexible. Right. So sometimes what it says is sometimes XML is too flexible. This is too much flexible in certain cases. So when you are developing applications using these web services and all, you will understand that sometimes XML is too flexible. Most programs can only process a subset of all possible XML applications, right? So most programs can only process a subset of all possible XML applications because XML is too flexible. There is no tag standards for elements and tags. That means most programs can only process a subset of all possible XML applications. So every application can't process every XML file because there is no standard, because it's too flexible, right? For exchanging data, the format must be fixed, right? So as an example, elements, attributes, and their semantics. So those things should be fixed. That means there should be a particular standard for XML also, because it's too flexible, right? Document type definitions, DTD, for establishing the vocabulary for one XML application, in some sense comparable to schemas in databases, right? So document type definitions for establishing the vocabulary for one XML application, right? So DTD is for this, for establish the vocabulary for one XML application. That means to establish a particular standard for XML also, right? A document is valid with respect to a DTD if it conforms the rules specified in that DTD, right? Most XML parsers can be configured to validate, right? So a document is valid with respect to a DTD, right? So XML is too flexible. XML is too flexible. You can define your own text, right? So because of this, most programs can process only a portion of all possible XML applications, right? So for exchanging data, there should be some sort of standard fixed or some sort of vocabulary, right? So that vocabulary is called DTD, right? So we are defining some sort of vocabulary which is called DTD, right? A document is valid with respect to a DTD. So there can be several types of DTD, so document type definitions, right? So if it is conforms to the rules specified in that particular DTD, we call this, that is a valid XML document. Most XML parsers can be configured to validate. So XML parsers can be configured to validate to a particular DTD, right? A particular document type definition document validate, and we can configure XML parsers, right? So so here this DT, this is a DT, right? So this element article can have these three tags, right? Title, author, and text, right? Element article ke element ayata තියෙන පුළුවන් මෙන්න මේ text තුන විතරයි. ඊට වඩා තියෙන්න බෑ. This is a DTD, document type definition, right? So this is a definition for a particular document type. So DTD example. So element is article. So article element can have only these three sub elements: title, author, and text. What is this author plus means here? Right? Author plus means there can be multiple authors, right? So title can have PC data, author can again have PC data. Text should be abstract, and there should be a section also. So likewise, you can define this XML DTD. Sorry. So this DTD can have these elements, right? This DTD can have only these elements. What are the elements? Title, article, title, author, text, abstract, section, literature, and index, right? So this article element can have only these elements, right? Only these sub elements or these tags. So article can have only title, author, or text. So here there's a plus mark. What is this plus mark means? There can be multiple authors, right? But there can be multiple titles. There can be only one single title. In article කියන එක යටතේ තියෙන්න පුළුවන් title, author, and text. ඔය තුන. Right? So in these, among these three, so article element can have title, author, and text elements. Only these elements, right? Or else there can be multiple elements, but DTD knows only to process these three elements, right? You can have multiple, but this DTD knows only to process these three particular elements. So among these elements, author can have multiple author elements, right? There can be multiple author elements, but only one title and text. So inside the title element, you can have PC data. So what is this PC data? PC data means past character data. That means simply content, right? The content. As an example, the name of the or the title, right? Or the name of the author, right? So title, author. And under text element, you can have abstract, section, and literature, right? So what this is section star means? This section is optional, right? That means the section is not mandatory to have, right? So abstract section then again only have past character data, section have only past character data, plus it can have multiple indexes, and literature have past character data, indexes have past character data, right? So why do we want to have this what we call DTD, right? So if we go back to previous slide, it says sometimes XML is too flexible, right? If we define XML in the way we want, XML define correct in the way we want into our opinion, right? According to our opinion, we define XMLs in the way we want, right? But the applications doesn't know how to process this particular XML document, right? So in that case, we need to define a DTD, and we have to set up a XML parser to validate this DTD, right? So this is an example of document type definition, right? So this XML is flexible, but this DTD ensures that flexible XML document has some sort of a standard, right? Understood?
Yes, sir.
So, yes. Any questions?
No, sir. Understood.
Right. So, content of the title element is past character data, right? Content of the article element is title element followed by one or more author elements followed by text elements, right? So content of the text element may contain 0 or more section elements in this position. So plus means there can be one or more author elements, right? Author plus means there can be one or more author elements. That means there can be one or more authors, right? Section asterisk mark or the star mark means content of the text element may contain 0 or more. That means section asterisk or section star means that is optional, that is not mandatory to have, right? There can be or there cannot be, right? So one element declaration for each element type, right? Apart from that, so one element declaration for each element type. Right. These are the things. So exactly one such element. Plus means one or more. Asterisk means 0 or more. Question marks means 0 or 1. There can be 0 or 1. Here it is 0 or more, 1 or more, right? Like this. Right. So elements can have mixed content also. It can have data content as well as some child elements as well. And sometimes elements can be empty, right? And elements with arbitrary content, that is nothing for production level DTDs anyways, right? And then we can define attributes for elements, right? So for each element we can have multiple attributes, right? As an example, attribute list section is one attribute. Section is the element name. Number is the attribute name. C data is the attribute type. Required is the attribute default, right? As an example, attribute default required is, I mean, you need this in each element instance. Again, how many element instance again, you should have this attribute. Implied means it is optional. Fixed means always has this default value. Default means it has a default value. Right? Okay. So this is an example for attributes. Right. So the next thing is linking DTDs and XML documents. So I think yes, let's do these things next week. Otherwise, it will be too much for you to understand. We did a lot today. So we'll do a practical in this DTDs also in next week. So now the time for question and answer session. Anything that you don't understand from, we have done these sessions for 5 weeks. Today is the 5th week. So do you have any questions to ask? Subject related or anything?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So අපි මොන හරි මේ application එකක් අපි හදලා ඒකට OTP passcode එකක් දෙනවා නම් ඒක මේ අදාළ network එකත් එක්කද අපි ඒක මේ කරගන්න ඕන නැත්නම් කොහොමද?
ඔව්. OTP එකක් ගන්න නම් අදාළ network provider එකෙන් ගන්නත් පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඔයගොල්ලන්ට ඒක ගන්න පුළුවන් services තියෙනද ලංකාවේ දෙන shout out කියලා service එක. get shout out කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. තව international services තියෙනවා. Twilio කියලා එකක් තියෙනවා. ඔය වගේ services තියෙනවා. ඊට අමතරව you can use this what you call Google Firebase also, right? But still, if you want to have the SMSs under your business name, let's say your business name is Uniotech. So when you send a SMS to the user as an OTP, if you want to appear the sender as Uniotech, then definitely you have to get it from a local provider. For that, you have to provide a business registration. It should be a private limited company.
Thank you, sir.
I took one before some time from Lankabel. It cost me around 2,500 for the connection. I had to give my business registration also. And once I give the business registration, they gave it to me. It's just 2,500 for the connection fee. I get API, a web service, where I can call from my application the web service. When I call the web service, it will send the message to the particular number that I'm communicating to the web service. And the price per SMS was something like 50 cents or something like that. It's very cheap, but you need to have a business registration. I can't hear you properly. What kind of connection is You don't have questions? Right, then shall we wind up the sessions for the day?